Welcome to the Gluten-Free Gab, the podcast where we dive into all things gluten-free. Whether you're living with celiac disease, managing a gluten intolerance, or simply just curious about the gluten-free lifestyle, we've got something for you. From a fellow celiac, I'm your host, Amelia, and in each episode we'll explore the science, personal stories, and real-life emotional challenges of going gluten-free. Whether you're just starting out your journey or have been in this journey for years, there's something here for everyone. Joining me today is Claire Stuckey, who has been working as a freelance dietitian for over 25 years. She specialises in gastrointestinal conditions, so it's safe to say Claire is an expert in this field when it comes to celiac disease. Welcome, Claire. It's a pleasure to have you on. Do you want to start by introducing yourself and the kind of services you provide as a dietitian?
Yeah, brilliant. So I specialise in anything to do with the gut. So it could be things such as celiac disease, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, colitis, just anything that affects the digestive system, basically.
Yes, anything, all gut related, basically.
All gut related, yeah.
So now, speaking of that, do you want to talk about what actually is celiac disease?
So celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. So it's where gluten gets into your body and it attacks your body and it attacks your digestive system. So it makes it difficult for people with celiac disease to absorb nutrients due to the damage that gluten can cause to the bowel.
So it's basically your body attacking the nutrients and backing it off, basically.
Yeah, attacking itself, basically, yeah. Yeah, a bit like other autoimmune conditions, yeah.
And how does that differ from, let's say, a gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance? Because they're two completely different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important point to recognise that they are two different things. So with celiac disease, you're getting this damage to your body, and that can cause some really nasty complications if you carry on eating gluten. But actually with gluten sensitivity, you don't get any damage to the gut. So although sufferers can have some horrible symptoms, they're not at any risk of disease from it.
Exactly. So would you say that it affects them, so it doesn't affect them internally, but let's say, would they get like a rash? Like what sort of symptoms would they experience from that?
Not necessarily. Normally it will be kind of gut symptoms, so things like bloating, maybe loose stools, those kind of symptoms. So it's still, a real condition, and it's still something that people need to maybe reduce their gluten intake. But what they need to be aware of is that it's not going to cause any ill health if they do decide to eat gluten, whereas in celiac disease, it's a little bit more serious. Some people find they can eat a bit of gluten and it doesn't cause them too much bother. It's only when they start eating a lot of it. But for celiacs, every crumb needs to be avoided,
exactly.
Which is a totally different situation.
Yeah, the smallest bit can...
Yeah.
So what must a celiac person actually avoid?
Okay, so it's gluten, which is a protein, and that is found in wheat, rye and barley. And we do advise most people to avoid oats that can be contaminated with gluten as well.
I think that's very important to mention, because I remember when I was first diagnosed, I wasn't too sure whether to avoid oats.
Yeah.
And also, do you avoid oat milk? Because is that oats as well?
Yeah, so oat milk is okay because it doesn't have the protein in there. But yeah, and on a practical level, it is really difficult to avoid gluten because it's not just the obvious foods like bread and pasta, it's all those hidden sources of gluten, and that makes it really hard because you spend ages shopping, looking
Tell
at
me
labels.
about it.
Yeah, and labels, they're not always clear. They can be really confusing. And a lot of the patients I see, they can be diagnosed quite later on in life, so in their 60s or 70s, where perhaps their eyesight isn't the best, and that makes it really hard for them to read those labels.
Yeah, I think that's another very important point you just mentioned, because when I was diagnosed, I've had it all my life, but my parents only decided to look into it when I was about 6 or 7. So I've always grown up thinking that you're born with it, no matter what. So would you say that you can develop it on later in life, and what kind of triggers that?
Yeah, so no one really knows. So you've always got the genetic susceptibility to be a celiac, and it runs in families. 1 in 10 people of a celiac will also be celiac. 1 in 10 relatives, yeah. So no one knows what switches on that gene. And I've had people diagnosed in their 90s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. If you followed a normal diet for 90 years and then suddenly you're told to go on a strict gluten-free diet, it's hard.
So what is the typical process for diagnosing a celiac?
Yeah, so the most important thing to remember is that you do have to eat gluten to get diagnosed. As soon as you start avoiding gluten, then it's not going to show up in any blood tests, or it's not going to show up on any other tests. So you need to keep eating gluten. The first thing your doctor would do is a blood test. It's called a tissue transglutaminase blood test, or we call it TTG for short, or some people just call it the celiac blood
See, that's
test.
very interesting because I didn't actually know it had a name.
Ah, okay, just the celiac blood test.
Yeah, I was always just told just to have a blood test. I was never told the actual official name of it.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a long-winded name of a blood test that no one's going to remember anyway. But that's the first thing. So a really simple blood test that normally comes back within a week, and that will tell you if it's likely you're celiac. Now, some people, it depends on age and it depends on how high that blood test is. Some people need to go on and have something called an endoscopy. So it's a camera down the throat, and then they take a bit of tissue from your bowel and look at it under a microscope and look for features of celiac disease. Not a pleasant procedure, unfortunately, but it's really important that if you think you're celiac, you go on and have that procedure. And, people do get sedation for it, so it does make it that little bit easier to have.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because, when I was younger, I started off by having blood tests, and the blood tests were also to see if there was anything else wrong with me, so like low iron, as you mentioned. I think it was also to test diabetes and Crohn's, because that is also linked to celiac disease.
Yeah, that's right.
Then I was given an endoscopy, and then I went on, I think years later, I went on to have a colonoscopy as well, which is also not something very pleasant, but it has got to be done if you want that official diagnosis.
Yeah, it's got to be done. And normally staff doing those procedures, they're really good at putting people at ease.
And they know what they're doing, like they're trained experts after all. So what does happen to the body when a celiac consumes gluten?
So it is, where it's an autoimmune condition, it is basically gluten attacking the body. So in the small bowel, it's the bit of bowel just underneath the stomach, you have these villi, or they look like fingers basically, and their job is to absorb nutrients. But what happens in a celiac when they eat gluten is it damages the villi. So
it fights back.
It does. It fights, and basically you have a flat surface, so you don't have that ability to absorb food as you should do.
Yeah, so it's very important if you are a celiac to avoid.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are the common symptoms people with celiac disease experience?
So this is what makes it really hard, because you could have a room full of 100 celiacs and all their symptoms at diagnosis would be really different. So probably most commonly in my experience, people get diagnosed because they see their GP because they feel tired. And then the GP will go on and do investigations from that. But it can be anything. So it could be bowel problems. So some people have constipation, some people will have diarrhea, some people might have bloating. Sometimes we see people with weight loss. And then sometimes it's nothing to do with the bowel at all. So celiac disease can affect things like your skin, your hair. It can give you mouth ulcers. And then I get some people that have this kind of neurological picture where they get tingling in their fingers and toes or giddiness. I've had people walk into my clinic room that can't walk in a straight line, and it's part of the celiac disease, yeah.
Yeah, see, I remember, so every time I've had a gluten attack, it's all been different, which I think is very interesting. Like sometimes, one time I had a really bad gluten attack, my whole mouth was full of ulcers. Or I've had dermatitis herpetiformis.
Let's just call it DH.
Yeah, we'll just go with that.
Yeah.
So that's basically spots all over your arm.
Yeah.
I was also given a biopsy for that as well when I was younger, and they confirmed that.
Yeah, and that's a nasty condition because it's these blistering rash, which is really
it's
painful.
It's like poppable spots they are.
Yeah, but you pop them and it's painful.
Yeah, and then it itches. Today's podcast is proudly supported by Tasty Cakes by Lisa. A huge thank you to Lisa for kindly giving me these delicious pastries right in front of me. Lisa is a talented baker based in the Bournemouth area. You can check out her amazing creations on Facebook at Tasty Cakes by Lisa. So are there any long-term health complications if a celiac refuses to stick to their diet?
Yeah, there are, and it's really important that people who are diagnosed with celiac disease are aware of some of these complications. So the biggest one that I see in practice is osteoporosis, and that can be really common in celiacs that either don't follow the diet or that are diagnosed later on in life. So osteoporosis is where your bones are more likely to break, and that can be quite devastating, particularly in older people when they lose their mobility because of it.
Yeah, so that's something you need to be very
Yeah,
careful of.
in younger people, then we worry a little bit more about fertility issues. So again, a lot of people don't realise that celiac disease, untreated, can affect fertility in both males and females, and unfortunately, in females, it can make miscarriage more likely as well. As well as that, really, it's just having those nutrient deficiencies that can make you feel ongoing tired and more likely to pick up infections. So particularly if you're low in iron.
Yeah, so if you do experience any of these symptoms, it's very important that you get it checked out, basically to avoid any of these issues happening in the future. I've heard a lot of myths about celiac disease. What are the common myths you would say that you've heard as a dietitian about celiac disease?
Yeah, so the biggest one is it doesn't come from people with celiac disease themselves, but more from friends and family. And it's that thought that a little bit of gluten won't do you any harm. And I'm sure you've heard that yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah. And actually, in a celiac, a little bit of gluten will do you harm. And that, there's evidence that even a crumb here or there could cause damage to your bowel and cause ongoing problems. So, we really do advise being strict with it.
No, that is very important, I think, to mention, because I've definitely been in situations before where my friends are like, or like, we can't find anywhere to eat, and they're like, oh, so surely a little bit won't hurt you. But no, it is very important that you must stick to your diet after being diagnosed. So as a dietitian, what role must you play immediately after the diagnosis in helping patients adjust to their diet?
Yeah, so it's really important as a dietitian that you don't purely just focus on diet, but also focus on the emotional side of it. Because a lot of doctors will use a throwaway comment of, you've only got celiac disease, just go and follow a gluten-free diet.
Like just deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't realise, we eat 5-6 times a day, maybe more than that. So every single time you're eating, you're having to think about it. And it really does affect those social situations as well. So, going to eat out, going to eat round friends' houses, it can be quite stressful. And then really it's counselling about the diet. So things like food labelling, how do you read food labels? How do you cope with going on holidays? How do you cope with eating out? And just making sure that people are aware of those complications so that they've got the motivation to follow the diet.
Exactly. No, yeah, I think that's very important, because I definitely remember, I was diagnosed when I was 6, so I don't really remember too much, but I do remember being very anxious in like going to kids' birthday parties, because obviously this was all very new for me as well. And I guess when I was that young, I didn't really understand why I couldn't eat gluten. What advice would you give someone who suspects they might have celiac disease but has not yet been tested?
So the key thing is keep eating gluten. Even if you feel unwell, it's really important that you keep eating it. Otherwise, when you do get tested, it's not going to show up. So that's the key message. And then there's 2 routes that I would go down. The first one is I'd look at an organisation called Celiac UK. And they've got a website which is celiac.org.uk. And on there they have a questionnaire that you can fill in, and it will screen you to see how likely it is that you are celiac. So that's a really useful tool. But I'd always say, if in doubt, go and see your GP and have a blood test to see if it is likely that you're celiac.
Finally, where can listeners or viewers find more of your work or connect with you online?
So I've got a website which is thedorsetdietitian.co.uk, and on there's my contact details, so people can email me or phone me and see what kind of services I offer.
Thank you very much, Claire, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to share the medical side of celiac disease. I wish you all the best for the future and with your journey. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time on Gluten Free Gab.